Welcome back to the Tech Track. My name's Josh, and I'm here with Deepak, and we're going to be emceeing the next couple hours here on the Tech Track side. So, yeah, my name's Josh. I'm working on developer relations at C Labs. Deepak, you want to intro?
Hey everyone, good to see you all today. I'm super excited to see all the amazing tech talks as well as the talks on the main stage. My name is Deepak. I am a Celo community fund steward, and I also am the founder of Multisig, and I think a lot about security and security around the Celo ecosystem. And I'm excited to be here. And just so that you guys are aware, so Yaz was emceeing the last track. He was representing Canada from the French side of things, and I'm joining in from Toronto, and I'm representing the English-speaking side of Canada, and I'm also representing India, which is my home country. Yeah, I'll let you take over, Josh, and introduce the first talk.
Cool. Thanks, Deepak. So yeah, up next, we're going to be talking about building on Ethereum and Celo, getting honest opinions from Tarun Chitra, James Prestwich, moderated by Jarrell James. And I just wanted to intro it a little bit. As some of you may know, Celo has a shared history with Ethereum and has a lot of shared functionality. So we're going to be exploring the question, are Celo and Ethereum competitors or complementary? So Jarrell, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Josh. So yeah, I am here, as he said, with James Prestwich and Tarun Chitra. Let's open it up for some intros. James, you want to give an intro?
Sure. I was just on this stage like an hour ago, but I can do it again. My name is James Prestwich. I've been working in crypto for 6 or 7 years now. My company Sumo was acquired by C Labs late last year to work on bridges and cross-chain interoperability between Celo and other chain ecosystems.
Okay, awesome. And Tarun, you want to give a quick intro of yourself?
Yeah, hey, my name is Tarun Chitra. I'm founder of a company called Gauntlet. We sort of do risk assessments and monitoring of DeFi systems and staking systems, and we've worked with Celo in the past, and it's great to see such a big conference be able to go live.
So just some questions. By the way, I'm Jarrell James. I work at Celo or C Labs as well, and I do a lot of developer relations stuff with Josh and Yaz and everyone over at engineering and product team, and just bringing all this stuff to you, the people. So I have some intro just questions. James, you've been in the space since nearly the start. What are the major, and that's not me calling you old, by the way, that's the space calling you old. What are the major lessons that you've learned about systems and behaviors of decentralized networks?
People are always going to surprise you and do something stupider than you expect. So no matter how much engineering you put into trying to protect people, they're always going to figure out some way around it and some way to ruin your day.
Well put. And Tarun, I mean, your career has spanned multiple industries, including running simulations on glass molecules at like biochemistry research firms. And like, is there really anything you can't do? And if so, why has crypto managed to absorb your attention these last few years?
Well, I just feel like crypto has a lot more unsolved problems that I think like in a lot of other technical spaces have been ignored. And there's also this aspect that these technical problems actually make it to production and are useful to people much quicker than I think in a lot of other industries. Of course, right now they're useful to a small population. That are the main participants. But I think the cool thing about crypto is that there is definitely something novel about the way things in finance that are really hard to do can be done by anyone pretty cheaply.
It's a really good point. So I guess we can go from there and move into some ecosystem questions, as we're supposed to be here having honest opinions about ecosystems like Celo and Ethereum. So for posterity's sake, I'm just going to ask you to keep it honest. So let me start off with this one. Are new layer ones essentially just verticals on Ethereum, especially with the promise of more bridges?
That's an interesting question. You're asking if Celo is an Ethereum scaling solution?
I am.
I think Celo is in that space. I think that we are providing a lot of the things that other Ethereum scaling solutions provide. I don't think we should say that we're just a new vertical on Ethereum, that it's only that. But I do think that that is a big part of what is going to drive people to Celo from the Ethereum space.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Tarun?
I maybe will be more honest, as you put it, but yeah, I think it's really hard to migrate liquidity off of right now. And until you can generate your own demand, which Celo, I think comparatively to other networks that are doing similar things like Terra, has been kind of focused on. Until that's true, I think you're really kind of tethered to ETH's liquidity. And so bridges are a good way to try to onboard users. I think one of the cool things we saw this year was that Terra's bridge was a really good way of onboarding new users from ETH into Terra. And I think, given that C Labs has the world's best bridge designer, I hope to see that happen on Celo too.
Nah, just take it, James. Just brush your shoulder off and take the compliment.
I feel weird now. I feel like I have a lot of expectations here.
Well, I mean, the thing is, at least your bridge is more decentralized. I think the other bridges are, for better or worse.
This takes me in, yeah. This takes me into a question I was just going to follow up with, because Tarun, without realizing it, just took out my next question, which was, do you believe the relationship is permanent or just a sign of the liquidity being siloed on ETH? And it seems like you believe that until that relationship can kind of evolve to not rely on the liquidity of ETH and onboard new users from ETH, then it's going to be kind of a symbiotic relationship. But since we're talking about bridges, are there any major risks, James? I'll send this to you. Are there any major risks or operational holes in the current way bridges are maintained? And would you consider current trust minimized bridges to be truly decentralized?
Well, I've worked on 50% of the trust minimized bridges out in the wild. There are basically two. There's Near's Rainbow Bridge and there's TBTC. Everything else is custodial. There's some guy out there holding all the money. The main issue with these things is typically that they're extremely expensive to run. The TBTC bridge is the cheapest by far, and it costs 10 ETH every week. So you really just don't want to be running these relayed bridges if you can possibly avoid it. We have a bunch of new tech that I talked about earlier that I think is going to address a bunch of these problems, but until it reaches, we're still months and months out from having that be mature and well adopted and deployed around the space. So I think we're going to keep seeing these custodial trusted bridges dominate for a little while.
You're talking about optics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I love talking about, but I'm not going to take up time on this panel to talk about something I just gave a prepresentation on half an hour ago.
I was going to say, if anyone's interested in hearing about that, go back and watch his video from earlier. So let's look forward a little bit. If we were to go 5 years in the future, and Celo has had a lot of success in poaching liquidity and users from ETH, or as we could say less violently, sharing the liquidity and users from ETH, what do we think are the main factors that would contribute in that success, in that migration?
So back in the day, Celo made a technical decision that broke compatibility with ETH wallets. And so as opposed to every other EVM chain, you can't use Metamask with Celo today. And in my opinion, that's been one of the main things holding us back during this wave of interest in ETH and scaling solutions, is that you can't just point your wallet at the Celo endpoints and have it work. So we're fixing that in the next few weeks, and I think that that's going to be one of the biggest factors for how Celo succeeds.
Tarun, I know you have thoughts on this. I've heard them at length. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like, Celo has kind of had an easier time integrating with a lot of these things, so it's kind of unfortunate that Metamask incompatibility kind of meant that people using like Moolah couldn't like go cross chain or like synthetically replicate their positions.
Yep.
But I think understanding that you need MetaMask support is a good first step.
I feel like we spent a lot of time figuring that out, and a lot of time that we could have spent growing user base was spent trying to figure out why we weren't growing.
I think that's a fair assessment, and that's also the main reason why I think so many people in our community are excited for the donut hard fork coming up. Check out donuts, get yourself some donuts. So let me ask you a little bit more of like an ecosystem like specific question around like theoretical propositions, right? So would you agree that the space has evolved and like away from the intellectual debates in 2018, 2019, where we were seeing mostly like theoretical declarations of usability, and now we're seeing more like most people trying to launch products or chains for products for specific purposes, like audiences or specific audiences or user acquisition. So do you think that that's kind of where we're headed, or do you think we're still stuck in this like theoretical, we aren't quite sure if what's gonna happen? Either one of you can take that.
Yeah, I guess I think we still don't totally know what will happen, but we do know how to make chains have tons of traffic. I think Presswitch likes saying, Uniswap is a vampire of block space, or it kind of sucks up block space the moment you have one. And I think that's a very fair assessment. But I think it's maybe not necessarily that the theoretical debates are still not there, because I think it's still a relatively sophisticated user base who's actually taking advantage of most of the features, right? Like this whole BSC boom has to do with unsophisticated users not even like knowing what they're using, but they were still able to onboard tens of thousands of new users in like 3 or 4 months, which is for crypto a lot.
Yeah. Go ahead, James. You have something to add?
Well, I think it's really interesting that you bring up BSC. Is like, essentially what happened is we reached a point of automation around these AMMs, around things like Uniswap, where you can spin up a whole new exchange with a bunch of liquidity and efficient, people arbing that exchange extremely quickly. So when BSC gets something like Pancake Swap or Burger Swap or whichever food coin it is this week, it comes with this huge existing ecosystem ported over from Uniswap that you can just point at BSC and it all works. And so you have these tens of thousands of new retail users entering this ecosystem, and there is already a huge ecosystem of sophisticated, automated market makers, ready to get some of that money.
Yeah.
So I think that this bull market isn't, it's not a this time it's different situation for the bull market. Is retail interest is going to ebb and flow over time. But what is different this time is the amount of sophistication that developers have put into these specific applications that really bootstrap the usage of a chain. And I say that Uniswap is a vampire not because it's like sucking blood, but because it is just consuming as much block space as it can at all times. And that is because of the sophisticated automation people have put around it to keep the prices in balance everywhere.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I want to, with that, take us to our first commercial break. Whoever is in charge of the screen share, could you please share my screen real quick?
Commercial break.
All right. Who's that Cryptomon? Since we have no audience participation, I'm just going to go to the next slide and say,
oh, no.
Oh, can you go to the next slide? God? God, could you go to the next? Oh, there it is. Nice. It's James. Look at you with that hair. Yeah, you're famous for your hair in the space now, and yet so little of it here. Explain.
Funny story. That photo is from 2015. So it was when I was just starting to grow it out, and it's in that awkward phase. And it was taken right after I had worked all night, and that's at like 8 a.m. or something. And so I'm just not even mentally present. And I hate that photo so much that it became a de facto test file for all distributed storage networks. So you can find
the Streisand effect.
You can find that photo in Storage, Saya, Filecoin, Arweave, and a few other places.
The Chinese government will never delete your picture.
That's probably true.
Although, except on Arweave, didn't they like supposedly did delete it?
I don't know. But I have a feeling that photo is going to follow me around for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially since I'm going to encourage everyone in both communities to try and NFT that as soon as possible.
Oh.
Let's start the bidding nets. 200 Celo. Okay, so wait, let's see this. Now, did y'all just see my screen? Oops. Who's that Pokemon? I mean, sorry, Cryptomon. I definitely changed it to Cryptomon at the last second because I was like, am I going to get in trouble? But boom, it's Tarun, a young Tarun, a very young Tarun. A little bit of context to this photo there, Tarun. Is that Alex Trebek that I see next to you?
Yeah, I was when I was a kid on Jeopardy.
Oh.
Did you?
10. So.
How'd you do?
Did not win.
It's not always about winning. It's just about hugging Alex Trebek.
I mean, yeah, he's more of a chiller than I think you might expect in real.
Oh, that's amazing.
Some more pointed questions here as we move into what I'm calling terms from the Twitterverse. Tarun, you've said that you think individual idea-based accomplishment is way less important than it was pre-World War II. And you think that most big societal projects, vaccines, AI, etc., have too many contributors and unclear attribution for the genesis of ideas. You've said that the age of armchair Gedanken to Nobel Prize is no more. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, so I think in the early 1900s, late 19th century, there was kind of this the archetype of like the philosopher person who like solved some kind of big problem, right? There's like Marie Curie and her husband, where they had a lab that they themselves funded, that they made a bunch of discoveries in. Of course, that also led to their cancerous death at that time. Or people, like Einstein, who really kind of coined the term Gedanken for thought experiments that you kind of do at home on your own. You theorize about how something happens, you design some experiments, and then later you actually see if it exists in the world. There was this kind of belief, I think for a long time, that it's just like, oh, there's some special individual who will kind of be the person who dictates that. And I think what we found since World War II, I think maybe World War II might have caused this, is that a lot of the big societal improvements that affect, double-digit percentage points of the population tend to come from increasingly large groups of people, and it's less of a this one person invented general relativity and it changed GPS. And I think that I use GPS kind of facetiously in this way that like, there's oftentimes people like, oh, general relativity, it's kind of useless, will never be used in practice. But the number one place that everyone uses it is the GR correction on your cell phone. So if you notice that your cell phone GPS got a lot more accurate like 10 years ago or like 5 years ago than it was like 10 years ago, this comes from that. But
it sounds like what you're saying is also that this can kind of apply to even like the idea genesis of these crypto networks and the ideas that come with the base foundational tools that they want to build in, like some of these chains being like chain with a product and user in mind, and like does it really come from any one team, or is it a bunch of teams looking at all the stuff everyone else is doing and saying, here's what we can improve and innovate?
I mean, I guess I think the main thing is that in crypto, I think this is the more fascinating thing about crypto is that you can't, there's no one person who can be the expert at everything. Mm-hmm. And like, this just goes back to the genesis of like Satoshi's initial code being kind of bad and like the math being wrong and stuff like that, right? But like, it still got built because a bunch of other people on the internet were like, well, I think this is a good idea and here's my contribution added to it. But yeah, this kind of like layered creation of a network or a thing that, affects a lot of people or a lot of people use. I think that's very different than kind of the like Web 2.0 version of the world, right? Which is still kind of this philosopher king version of like, oh, there's this anointed like sacred founder person who created everything and everything is due to them in some ways, even though it's obviously a kind of collective delusion that many people have. In crypto, I think it's a little less like that the philosopher king really exists. And that gets to this point that I don't think there's as much of this kind of like individualistic like success, like, oh, you created this and so you kind of are you take it from beginning to end forever thing that was much more common prior to World War II. I know. Well, Jake probably has some strong opinions on whether I'm being too optimistic about such a statement or not.
I think that's a very nuanced view, and I agree with the nuanced view. I think that the bias in crypto is definitely towards idolizing a few philosopher kings, even if the reality is significantly more complex. This space does strongly pattern matches a few individuals and just throws money at people who seem similar to them.
Well, that's actually a great transition for my next question, which goes to you, James. Speaking of, philosopher kings such as CZ and Binance, James, you've said that most of the nominal economic activity on all of these chains is driven by entities subsidizing traders and LPs to produce specific key results. What does that mean? And should we care about certain chains being better than others at this? For example, Binance Smart Chain.
Basically, if you look back at this bull market, one of the fun things that kicked it off was all of this yield farming. And so people were getting really into like getting that 8% on compound on their USDC. And someone somewhere along the way realized that they could just give away money to people. And it didn't even have to be real money. It could just be made up money that they deployed on the spot. And so the core metric of these AMMs and of things like compound is liquidity, is how much money is available in the system at any given time. And the realization from things like comp is that you can give away comp to people who provide liquidity, to people who bump your core metric and make you appear more successful. Comp in the very early days had this folding problem where you could lend money to yourself over and over and get a bunch of comp, but that still pumped their core metric. It's the compound system is significantly better now and doesn't have that problem as much anymore. But the thing to understand is that all of this yield farming, you're being paid to take specific actions that pump specific metrics for these projects. When you go and stake to get pancake swap token, I don't even know, pancakes.
Cake, just cake.
Cake. When you go stake to get cake, you are, putting your money into pancake swap, and you are making them appear, bigger, and like they have more liquidity and more interest, and they are paying you for that service. So a huge amount of what's going on in DeFi right now is just projects paying out people to pump specific metrics.
That's very enlightening. Thank you. I just have 2 questions left for you fellas, and then we'll hand it back over to Josh and Deepak. So just probably James and then Tarun, or if you want to take this as well. One of the things that's interesting about Celo, and I noticed that a couple other chains are starting to pontificate about doing this, and I think it's interesting, we've been doing it for a while, since inception, is that Celo takes a lot of the core functionalities of a protocol, like electing validators or managing the reserve system, and they're not actually handled at layer 1 there, but handled by the layer 2. What are the benefits of this? Is it easier to upgrade a network? And what are the downsides?
We should probably clarify terminology before starting. There's the blockchain client, which is written in Go, and then there's the core contracts, which are written in Solidity, which run the Celo consensus and run the proof of stake system and run, Celo and CUSD themselves. When we say that it's handled in layer 2, we mean those core contracts, which are still within the layer 1 blockchain. It's a bit of a terminology difference between Celo and most other ecosystems.
Awesome. So what are the potential downsides of something like that?
You have to write it in Solidity.
I was thinking
I don't like
there can be like conversion rates. The conversion has to be read at the state level is very gas intensive, and there's a lot of being done to improve on that. My last question for you both is, well, we see a lot of this discussion around gas fees being because of traffic, and people talking about things like optimism and how that can be super useful with reducing gas fees. So this kind of is a term I've heard Tarun use, and I think it's very applicable here. But what is Brass's paradox, and how does it play in here?
Yeah, Brace's paradox. Brace's paradox is basically a kind of more formal way of saying, if you build it, they will come. So if you add a plate, you have some resource, there's some capacity of the resource, it's scarce, and you suddenly add more of the resource, you may actually lead to more congestion than you had before. And this is not all it's not naively true, right? I could build tons of buildings and no one will go live in them. But with traffic networks, this tends to happen a lot. And I think that this also happens in crypto, because the more block space you offer for things like Uniswap, the more people will actually try to increase the set of arbitrage opportunities, and or the more people will subsidize those, kind of to James' earlier point.
It's really interesting to me because I kind of look at it as there's an old joke about cap theorem, and I'm going to make a similar joke here, is for any blockchain, you have gas, it's limited. So you can be any two of scarce, cheap, and desirable, and you can't not pick scarce. Basically, as soon as your chain space is scarce, no matter what, and end of sentence. You can't build an infinite space chain; it doesn't work. So you get to choose whether it should be undesirable to make transactions there. Nobody wants to use your chain, or the chain space costs a significant amount of money. That's your choice.
Well, that's a hell of a choice. And thank you. It's not been a hard choice for me to be here and moderate this panel. And thank you to James and to Tarun. I think we're just about at time, so I'm going to hand it back over. Any last minute shout outs? Anybody want to say hi to their mom? Anything like that? I'll go ahead. Hi, Mom. But yeah, Josh and Deepak, thanks for letting us have this space. And I hope everybody enjoyed this casual conversation and honest opinions about building on ETH and Celo.
Thanks, Jarrell. And thanks, James and Tarun. That was very educational. I got some good sound bites to share in the future in my future talks. So thank you for that. Learned a lot.